So, I'm always thinking about trying to eat healthier and add more fruits and vegetables into my day to day diet. And something that's really helped me is the BlendJet 2 portable blender. So now when I want something sweet, instead of going to the candy drawer, I can blend up a delicious, protein shake or smoothie that obviously is very fruit heavy because I need a sugar fix.
Yeah, that's awesome. So the BlendJet 2 is portable, so you can blend up a smoothie at work or at home, in Olivia's case, a protein shake at the gym, or even a margarita on the beach, which is great for
Ooh.
anyone who's traveling for the holidays or winter vacation.
Yeah,
Um,
snowbirds, let's
exactly.
go.
Exactly. BlendJet is small enough to fit in a cup holder, but powerful enough to blast through tough ingredients like ice and frozen fruit with ease. BlendJet 2 is also whisper quiet, so you can make your morning smoothie without waking up the whole house. And it lasts for 15 plus blends, and it recharges quickly with a USB-C. And best of all, BlendJet 2 cleans itself. Just blend water with a drop of soap and you're good to go. And it's also really cute, and they have many colors and designs. I think one of them is sort of a wood type pattern, which is so sleek.
Yeah,
They have Lisa Frank for people like us who had those school supplies.
millennials women like
Yep.
us.
Exactly. We love
I
it.
love it. So, what are you waiting for? Go to blendjet.com and grab yours today. Be sure to use the promo code GGS12 to get 12% off your order and free 2-day shipping. Happy holidays.
Happy
Yeah,
holidays from the frog.
yeah. From the frog and her spooky pal. Um, I'm Olivia,
And I'm Amy, and I normally don't
aka
sound
our
like
frog,
this. Yeah.
and this is Girls Gone
It's,
Spooky.
yay. Girls Gone
Yay.
Spooky Flu Edition.
Flu edition. We love a flu edition. No, we don't. We hate it.
Yeah.
Well, we kind of teased this already, but this week's episode is going to be like our holiday theme, which is scary stories. So, like we did for
Yay.
Halloween, for Christmas, if you observe it, if you don't, doesn't matter at all, because my story at least is not Christmas related at all. Um, and yeah, we're just going to try and scare the shit out of y'all and see how it goes.
Woohoo. Sounds good to
Yay.
me.
And I think I am first.
Yes, correct.
Okay, wait. Of course, I like, same as you, literally just closed my little thing. Oh my god.
Why
Okay,
do we
wait.
do it?
Why do we do it? Okay. Ba- Okay, it was right. Yeah. So basically, what I did was I went through. Oh, here it is. I went through all of the like supposedly like scariest no sleep stories on Reddit
Mm-hmm.
because someone did like a poll. It was like, what's the no sleep story that like even when you still think about it now, like it still scares you? And I was like, ooh, that'd be a good.
Spooky.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
good. So this one is I'm just going to read one today, but it's long. It's 5 parts. And I haven't read every detail, and I thought it would be kind of fun to just like also be experiencing some of the details for the first
Mm-hmm.
time with you guys. So
Yes.
if I'm like, oh my God, it's because I'm like actually reading the details for the first time. But I also went through some others. There was one other really scary one called The Third Parent
Hmm.
that it had some like really triggery topics,
Hmm.
namely like child abuse and like
Oh,
sexual abuse. And I was like, let's not do that
yeah.
one.
Maybe not.
So I skipped that one and chose a different one. So without further ado,
Mm-hmm.
this was shared by a user named the lovely Freya spelled with a J instead of a Y, in October of 2016. So this one's
Hmm.
been kicking around for a while,
Last
but
him.
it actually was just recently reposted because I guess the OP was like took it down like in a panic for some reason, so she reshared it. So this is the summer I met David. So
Ooh.
when I was young, we lived in an old farmhouse. I remember my father telling me that it was more than 100 years old, and that was the cause for the strange noises in the middle of the night. I never believed him. I was convinced that the noises were just David messing around downstairs. But in those early weeks of our friendship, no one in my family believed it was him. I never bothered to question why. My family had inherited a 65-acre pig farm that he and his father had built from the ground up. I can't remember how many pigs we had, but it was enough to warrant 2 barns. I lived on this farm with my family, 3 older brothers and 1 younger brother, until I was 8. We moved quite suddenly after a bad accident involving Joey, my younger brother, leaving him paralyzed. I didn't understand then why my father sold his farm at the time, but I do now. We had no neighbors to speak of. To our left, you'd have to go down more than 5 miles of road and cross a highway before you happened upon the next home. To the right, if you followed the large hill up and went around the bend, eventually you'd come across Mr. Carlin's house. I didn't know much about him other than he owned the cornfield that sat on the other side of the street, right across from our house, and that he always waved at me when he was on his tractor. This just like gives me flashbacks to like St. Louis with my grandfather when I was little,
Oh, that's nice.
which is cute, and it takes a turn. So my mother, just that part, just that
Yeah.
scene, not the whole thing.
Okay.
My mother at one point had informed me that Mr. Carlin had once had children and a wife, but a house fire had killed them all and left him alone, which, like, yikes.
Yikes.
That was back when his house was right across the street from ours, before he'd planted the cornfield over it. Now, it's important to note that Mr. Carlin was nearing 80, and my mother told me that this all happened when he was a young man. I suspect a good 50 years had passed from the time his home burned to the ground, snuffing out the lives of his family, and the summer that I met David. It was the first Monday afternoon of summer. I was especially happy because I hadn't had to go to school, and at the time, the first Monday was something of a commodity. I'd taken my pink bike with pretty red ribbons on the handlebars for a ride in the long driveway, but being the spunky 6-year-old I was, I'd grown tired of doing circles just outside of my house. I craved adventure, or at the very least, a chance to poke and prod spiders at the bridge. I knew there was no chance of my mom or dad allowing me to go down to the bridge by myself, but what they didn't know couldn't hurt them. Could hurt you, though, you little idiot.
Mhm.
Um, my dad was off on the farm doing whatever it was he did, and my mom was still inside, which meant I couldn't go. Not yet. I bided my time doing circles in the driveway until I watched my mom drive away, heading toward her church group. I saw my chance and I took it. It was late afternoon and the sun was high in the sky, beating down unforgivingly upon me. Jack, my oldest brother, was shirtless and tossing large bales of hay onto a wagon. I rode up to him and sweetly as I could muster, I begged for permission to go, reminding him that the bridge was still in his sight and barely 50 yards from our home. Jack's lips pressed together in a thin line like they usually did when he was thinking. His eyes narrowed and he looked back toward the barn. Dad doesn't like you going off on your own, you know that. He'll want one of us to go with you. My lower lip folded out into a pout, and I gave him the sad eyes I'd spent weeks perfecting in the mirror. I know, I whined, but you're busy, and Jim is with Dad, and I don't even know where Johnny is. Please? I've been in the house all day helping Mom with cleaning. I even scrubbed the walls, Jack. The walls! I was acting as if I'd been done a grave injustice, when in all reality, Mom and I scrubbed the walls once a month. Between a toddler brother and 3 older siblings, the walls were always getting filthy. But Jack didn't know that. My oldest brother's gaze fell upon me, and I looked up into his green eyes, giving him the most pathetic whimper. He looked over his shoulder one more time in search of our father, who was nowhere to be seen. I knew I had him in the palm of my hand. The thing about being an only sister in a house full of boys is that they developed this weird need to keep me safe and also happy, and sometimes that extended out to letting me do things I knew I shouldn't have done. All right, Jazzy, he said, using the nickname I despised so much. It made me sound like a baby. I wasn't a baby anymore, but just this once. And if you get caught, don't tell Dad that I was the one to tell you it was okay, all right? I jumped up excitedly. Yes, I cried happily before hopping on my bike and pedaling as fast as I could down the gravel driveway. The gravel driveway. My plan My plan was to get the hell out of there before Jack came to his senses and realized my dad would have murdered him for letting me go off on my own. We lived under strict rules. No one younger than Jim, at age 10, was allowed to go anywhere on their own, even if it was just down the road. My father was a strong believer in the buddy system. His worries didn't stem from an area riddled with crime, but instead the simple fact that it was summer. Summer meant migrant workers, and migrant workers meant a bunch of people around Mr. Carlin's house that no one in the family knew. I managed to get my little butt all the way down the bridge without Jack calling me back or Dad coming out of the barn and throwing a tantrum. And once there, I spent a few precious moments of freedom twirling thin sticks into the sticky spider webs. After the first few nudges, the spiders would get excited. They'd glide across their webs in a graceful display that I can only describe as beautiful. Their small, shiny front legs poked and prodded at the stick as I tried to decide what was invading its space and ruining its home. After several seconds of trying to decide what it was, the spiders would often limb off their web and explore the stick, giving me a chance to put my palm below them and wait patiently for it to descend down and tickle my skin with their tiny prodding legs. My mother was terrified of spiders. My brothers, not wanting to inherit her debilitating fear, had taught me that they were nothing more than hairy bugs. I thought them to be endearing, which was admittedly strange for a small girl. I was about to let my fifth spider of the day go in the weeds beside the metal posts of the bridge when a small voice drew me out of my own musings. Is that a spider? It asked incredulously. I stood up and turned around only to find a boy, probably a year or two older than myself, standing just a few feet away from me. His eyes were locked onto the spider that was now dangling from my fingertip. He gave me a toothy grin as I stared up at him. Yep, I answered, very used to people being overly critical of a weird girl who liked arachnids. That's cool. I love bugs, he admitted. My eyes lit up. I do too, I gushed happily. My name's Jasmine. What's yours? I asked, using the same old introduction they'd taught us in kindergarten and first grade. David, he answered. Pronouncing the word funny, he said it like David.
Oh.
It took me a full minute to put together that he was Mexican, which made sense given his dark hair and skin, something not often seen in the area I lived in. Want to play? I asked, handing the boy a stick. He said he did, and there we stood, shoulder to shoulder, disrupting webs and talking about the pretty designs on the backs of the spiders. Soon enough, we'd run out of large black-furred arachnids to play with, but that didn't stop David. He went wandering over to the other side of the bridge and found a sleek, bulbous, fat spider to poke at. Come here, Jasmine, he called, laughter in his voice. Look at how pretty this one is. You should hold it. I'll pretend to take pictures. I was filled with a sudden, tingling sort of fear that started at the base of my spine and moved up to my limbs. My tiny hand reached out and slapped the stick away from David's hand. Ow, he shouted, glaring at me. You can't touch those, David, I explained, trying to keep my sudden fear and anger in check. I did what I could to explain this to him like my father explained it to me, calmly, quietly, without anger or judgment. You see that red dot on its back? If you look at its belly, it'll have a red hourglass on it. That means it's poisonous. It's a black widow, I explained. You can't touch them. If you get bit, you could die. David only laughed, shaking his head. Who told you that? He asked. Whoever it was is lying. My dad and I catch these all the time, he insisted. He spoke with such conviction and such surety that I remember thinking that perhaps I'd remembered wrong. Maybe it was the spiders with the yellow dots on their backs that I shouldn't play with. I looked over to him. Are you sure? I asked. I waited for a nod before I picked up my stick and began the slow process of twirling it along the web. The spider had just started poking around at the twig when a familiar voice called for me. I spun around, eyes on my house where Jack stood waving his arms. Come inside, it's time for dinner. Can I bring my friend? I shouted back. Jack paused for a long time, eyes on David and I before he nodded. Sure, why not? I'll ask Mom to set another place. I threw the stick to the ground, abandoning the spider. I turned back to David, who for one reason or another looked a little angry. I brushed it off, not knowing or really caring why he might be upset. Do you want to come inside for dinner? I asked. David's features slowly began to melt into the same pleasant look he'd worn since we met. He gave a nod. Sure, thanks. Do you need to ask your mom or dad? I asked as I lifted my bike from the ground. David shook his head. No, my dad won't worry unless I'm out past dark, he promised. At only 5 p.m., there was still plenty of summer sun left in the sky. Together, we walked down the road and across the driveway. I left my bike in the garage, and then the two of us went inside. Hey, Mom, I shouted as I entered the home. I pointed over to David. This is David, I said, using the pronunciation of his word. I met him by the bridge, I explained. His dad won't care if he's here as long as he's home by dark. Can you stay for dinner? My mom turned to us, her eyes sparkling with amusement and happiness, probably because for the first time in forever, I'd brought home a friend. I knew from experience that because David was a boy, the whole house was going to be making jokes about us dating or getting married, but I didn't think I cared. Sure, he can stay, Mom answered with a nod. Thanks, I chirped. Thank you, ma'am, David said, a smile on his lips, using the title that most kids use when speaking to an adult. You're welcome, my mom sang back, as she grabbed up a heaping glass bowl of potatoes from the counter and walked them into the dining room. Everyone else was already sitting, expectant eyes on David, and I. It's so hard for me to read that word and not just say David.
Uh-huh.
David and I as we walked through the threshold. Confusion washed over the faces of my older family members, while Johnny, who was only 2 years older than myself, laughed and mumbled something under his breath about me not being able to find a real friend. I looked over to David, who, to my dismay, looked entirely ashamed. I'd never been so livid in my whole life. Johnny's friends were all terribly racist, and while my mom and dad did what they could to stop the behavior, a racist comment, much like this one, occasionally slipped out. I glared at him, but my father was the one to speak. Johnny, he snapped. That isn't nice. Apologize, he demanded. Johnny looked back at us with irritation written across his features. Sorry, he sneered. He didn't mean the apology, that much was positively certain, but no one else bothered to tell him off, so Davida and I simply took our seats quietly, right beside one another. David glared at Johnny for several seconds, but Johnny made a point of completely ignoring him. So, David, where are you from? My mother asked. Mexico, David answered. My dad and I come here every year in the summer so my dad can work. Sometimes I help too. Oh, that's very interesting, my mother chirped before looking over to meet my eyes. How did you and David meet? She asked. I knew exactly where this was going, and I wasn't having any of it. Mom, we aren't dating, I insisted. She raised her arms in surrender. No one said you were. I just asked where you met. By the bridge, David answered. I glanced over to him, my mouth full with my mother's famous herb and garlic mashed potatoes. David was sitting politely with his hand. Yeah, sounds really good. David was sitting politely with his hands folded in his lap. For one reason or another, he hadn't touched his food. In fact, his eyes were still locked on Johnny, who only now seemed to even notice us. His brows furrowed in response, his lips pressed into a thin line. Yeah, by the bridge, I answered, once my mouth was no longer filled with potatoes. I watched slow anger rise up in my dad's face and Jack shift uncomfortably in his seat. My father opened his mouth, probably to ask why I thought it was a good idea to go out to the bridge by myself. Suddenly, I remembered the spider, and while I hadn't intended to cut him off, I also hadn't grown enough to develop the patience needed to wait for someone else to speak while something so pressing was searing into my brain. Hey, what spiders are the black widows? I asked. Are they the ones with the yellow dot or the red dot? I asked. My father's brows shot up. He watched Jack visibly relax into his seat and tossed me a grateful look. Red dot, Dad answered, his voice leaving no room for argument or uncertainty. I could tell in that moment that he'd entirely forgotten the bridge. Why? Did you see one? Yeah, David thought we could play with it, but I told him we couldn't. I left out the part where I decided to do it anyway. I hadn't touched it after all. You and David stay away from those, Dad said, his eyes narrowed at the two of us. Yes, sir, we echoed. My father didn't often look angry, so in the rare occasions like this one, I was sure to listen to him. Dinner passed quickly, and David and I were told to go outside and play, but stay clear of spiders. David was acting really weird that night, almost angry. I wondered if it was because my dad had yelled at us. I put the thought out of my mind and played until the sun touched the horizon when David said he needed to go home, and my mother called me inside. The next several weeks passed without incident. David started coming over every day, becoming a regular fixture in the house. We'd play outside, we went with Jim and Jack a few times to go fishing, we even accompanied Mom into town once to go shopping. Mom was nice enough to buy us both an ice cream. Unfortunately, the moment we got outside, David dropped his. He looked so crushed and so embarrassed about the whole thing that I quickly offered to share my own. He took me up on the offer, and my mom was sure to tell me how nice I was being. I started drawing pictures of Davida and I together. I was rather talented of an artist at my meager 6 years of age. And what I mean by this is that my stick figures had both the proper color of skin and hair, and we were both clothed. David had quickly become my best friend. It wasn't odd for him to come over and stay from daybreak to sundown. Sometimes he'd be waiting for me outside when I woke up. I'd run to the door, fling it open, and tell him to come in. He always helped with chores, even though my mom said he didn't have to. We'd been friends for nearly 2 full months when he first breached the subject of a sleepover with me. I agreed and hastily ran inside to ask my mom and dad, who were sitting at the table discussing bills. They agreed, but on the condition that he slept downstairs on the couch and that he and I cleaned up after ourselves. So that evening, after dinner and a few more snarky remarks from Johnny, we got to work on making David's bed. We made a veritable fort that we decided we'd play in before we went to bed. We decided we were in the ocean. David and I were pirates looking for buried treasure. We searched high and low, crash landing on no less than 5 islands before our fun was cut short around 9 p.m., nearly a full hour after my normal bedtime. I fell asleep with thoughts of our adventures dancing through my mind. We'd done so much in the past 2 months. I felt so lucky to have met David, and I wouldn't admit it at the time, but I will now. I had quite a crush on him. I was awoken from my slumber in the middle of the night by a large crash and a howling scream. Fear, the likes of which I'd never experienced before, coursed through my body as I threw my blankets off myself and joined the ranks of my parents and older siblings as we rushed down the hall. Joey, my only younger brother, could be heard crying from his bedroom. Jim was quick to rush to him. His soothing voice could be heard through the hallway as he assured the 3-year-old that everything was okay. I remember my Jack I remember Jack stopping me just as I'd hit the banister. "Whoa there, Jazzy," he said. His voice was too quiet, too calm. Everyone else sounded frantic, and someone was downstairs crying. I was terrified that David had gotten hurt. "What's wrong?" I demanded. Jack paused, his eyes moving back to the staircase before looking at me. "Johnny just fell down the stairs. He'll be okay, though," he promised. I watched him carefully. If he was okay and nothing was wrong, then why couldn't I go see? It didn't make any sense, and then one shouted sentence made everything clear. "I can see my bone!" Johnny wailed from the
Ew.
base of the stairs. Yeah.
No.
No. Jack winced, and my heart skipped a beat. "Liar!" I hissed. "He's not okay." Unshed tears began to well up in my eyes as Jack tried to direct me back to my bedroom, but I wasn't having any of it. I tried to push my way back toward the stairwell, and I was barely 40 pounds, standing several inches shorter than most of my peers. Jack had taken after my father. He was more than 6 feet tall and weighed at least 150 pounds. So after several long seconds of squirming and struggling against his vice-like grip, I took to screaming, "I just want to make sure Johnny's okay." "What if I come with you?" a very groggy David asked from the staircase as he walked up, dodging body after body of worried family members. I looked up to Jack. "Is that okay?" I asked, wiping new tears away from my eyes. "Can I go to my room with David?" Jack swiped black hair back with his hand and gave a nod. He leaned down and kissed my forehead. "Sure, Jazzy, that's okay," he answered. "Dad and Mom are going to take Johnny to the hospital. If you or David need anything, you can come and get me, okay?" David and I nodded before heading back to my bedroom. We laid down in my bed, head to foot, and talked. We talked about how Johnny's arm looked. David had seen it on his way up. He said the bone was jutting out of the wrist, and looking whiter than anything he'd ever seen. He told me my mom put his arm on the pink pillow that we all hated, and she and my dad ushered him outside. We stayed up until sunrise touched the dark sky. David talked all the while, trying to make me feel better. He assured me that Johnny was fine. He'd be okay. He just needed a cast and probably some stitches. David had a really funny way of always making me feel better. Over the course of the next few days, Johnny went on and on and on about how he'd been pushed down the stairs. He blamed Jim, but he and Jack shared a room, and Jack assured him that he'd been sleeping the whole time. He'd only woken seconds after Jack did. All the same, Johnny was certain it had been Jim because he said he saw someone just a little shorter than himself right behind him when it happened. Despite Jim being a full 2 years older than Johnny, Jim, like me, was short for his age, while Johnny and Jack were both giants. Johnny and Jim fought for days after that, always arguing, always shouting at each other. At one point, Johnny actually took a swing at him. Jim managed to dodge the blow, but Dad had to intervene. He took them both to the kitchen to talk. No one was supposed to listen in when someone got in trouble, but I was a curious kid and decided I needed to know what was being said. Davida and I stood in the long weeds that had once been part of the flower garden. The beautiful bursts of violet, red, and pink had eventually been taken over and drowned out by chickweeds and dandelions after Joey was born, and my mom suddenly didn't have time to tend to the flowers. Our backs were against the front paneling just below the opened window. We made no noise as we listened intently to what was being said. Dad questioned Jim over and over about what had happened, but Jim insisted he was asleep. Johnny called him a liar a few times, and eventually Jim broke down. I'd never heard Jim cry before. It was heartbreaking. He asked over and over why no one believed him, reminding Dad that Jack had vouched for him. Dad apologized, but Jim wasn't having any of it. He asked to go to his room. I could tell Dad felt bad just by the way he fell silent, likely nodding his head in response. The squeak of the chair against the linoleum was suddenly the only sound in the kitchen, and after a solid minute of silence, Johnny's voice rang out. "Someone shorter than me pushed me." he insisted. It had to be either Jim or Jasmine. I'd heard enough at that point. Looking back, I wish I would have paid more attention to what was being said. But as it was, I began to step away. I stopped when I caught sight of something moving in front of me. Suddenly, the world ceased to exist. Every noise except the rush of my own blood behind my eardrums faded away. I was hyper aware of my own heartbeat and the rapid, ragged breaths that tore through my chest. I've always loved the way snakes move. It's so pretty, so graceful. They have a quiet elegance about them, but this snake made that dizzying, heart pounding sort of fear creep up on me. My hands went numb. My breath hitched, and I let out a small, distinctly feminine squeak. David looked down, a wide, genuine smile brushed across his lips. Hey, look, a king snake, he said happily. That's not a king snake, I whispered, keeping myself as still as possible. It's red and yellow and black. It's a coral snake, and they're very poisonous. My voice was tight and pinched. I felt as though I'd been punched in the gut. I kept imagining it rearing up and striking, biting me down to the bone and stopping my heart with its poison. No, it isn't, David insisted as he reached down to grab it by the back of the neck. Aside from becoming very still, it didn't react. It acted as though it hadn't even noticed his presence. See? He asked. They're nice. I catch these all the time back home in Mexico. You can pick it up. It won't hurt you. I looked at him with hesitance in my eyes. He'd been wrong about the spider. Why wouldn't he be wrong about this? David rolled his eyes and began to pet it with his free hand. See? It's fine. Just pick it up. I'll keep its head steady, he promised. I should have listened to my gut. I should have walked away right then and there, but I didn't. My 6-year-old brain was insisting that if David could touch it, so could I. Slowly, so as not to scare it and make it wiggle free of David's grasp, I bent down, my arm outstretched. Jasmine! Came a frantic shout to my left. David and I both jumped. The snake bolted free, heading straight toward me. I shrieked. Looking from the snake to my now terrified brother, Jack grabbed a nearby shovel and sprinted towards me. Stay still, he shouted. David was halfway across the driveway. Run, he shouted. Run before it bites you. Had I been thinking clearly, alarms would have been going off in my head. If it was a king snake, if David knew this, then why did I have to run? But I wasn't thinking rationally. I was caught in the moment, my heart in my throat, my hands clammy and shaking. I felt like I was going to puke. Jack was too far away to help. The snake rose up on its belly, bobbing back and forth as most snakes will before they strike. Run! Came David's command again. I did. I got 2 steps away when I felt something hit the back of my shoe. I let out a howl of terror. Black! Before the snake had a chance to strike a second time, Jack's shovel buried its head into the ground. The snake's body writhed and struggled beneath the heavy metal, its tail whipping the ground beneath it. Jack stomped on the metal part of the shovel over and over, causing the crunch of breaking bones to echo into the pseudo-silence. The familiar sound of the screen door slamming caused me to jump and spin to face the front of my house. My dad rounded the corner, trailed by my mother, both demanding what the noise was about. Jack lifted the shovel and hit the snake a few more times. Dummy nearly got herself killed. She tried to pick this thing up, he answered. All the color leaked from my parents' faces as they stared down at the 3-foot behemoth. Jasmine, my mom shouted, her eyes alive with fear as she stared over to David and I. You know what a coral snake looks like. I thought it was a king snake, I insisted. I really did. Jasmine, we don't have king snakes around here, my father explained. The fear had been replaced by a quiet sort of anger. David told me it was, I shouted. David's eyes widened and he glared death at me as I confessed to everything. He told me it was a king snake. He told me to pick it up. He told me to run. Enough, my dad shouted. If David is going to get you hurt, then he can't come over anymore, he boomed. To say I was terrified is an understatement. You hear that, David? My father asked, glaring daggers at the two of us. You aren't welcome here anymore. David grabbed my hand, tears in his eyes. He pulled me toward the end of the driveway. Let's go, he shouted. I tried to stop, but David was strong, so much stronger than I remembered him being. He pulled me across gravel, forcing me to go. Get your ass back here, Jasmine, my father roared. He'd never sworn before that point. Suddenly, I stopped struggling and began sprinting right beside David. I'd never been spanked, not once, but I knew from the stories Jack had told me about when he was little that that's what was about to happen. Where are we going? I asked as our shoes bounced off the pavement on the road. My heart was clawing at my chest, begging to be freed. My whole body thrummed with excitement and fear. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Tears streamed down my face. Into the cornfield, David shouted back, which, yikes.
Not a good place to go.
Yeah, we'll go find my dad. He won't let your dad hurt us, he promised. Looking back now, I know that under normal circumstances, I'd never run from my father. I'd never been abused and had no reason to fear him, but in that moment, I felt terrified. Heavy footfalls exploded from behind us, but I never looked back. I slipped into the cornfield behind David. We dodged large stalks of corn running this way and that, trying to put as much distance between us and the footfalls as we could. I shrieked when something hard grabbed my shoulder. Whoever it was forced me to stop. David continued to pull at my arm. It felt as though he was going to rip it from its socket. I howled in agony, my limbs wildly swinging as I tried to prevent myself from being stolen away from my best friend and the promised safety of his father. Holy fuck, Jack breathed. It was with those words that sudden clarity settled over me. Something was very wrong. Jack didn't swear. My father forbade it. Jack's arms suddenly wrapped around my waist. Holy fuck, he repeated. Dread filled my small body. Jack wouldn't have sworn unless something was terribly wrong. I stopped thrashing and I looked up to Jack. I'll never forget what I saw in that moment. His eyes were wide with fear, his mouth was agape, his hands were shaking, sweat glistening upon his brow. I'd never seen my older brother afraid of anything. In my eyes, Jack was just as superhuman and invincible as my father was. They were both massive men, more than 6 feet tall, both rippling with muscles, both with beards and calloused hands, but something had frightened Jack, and as far as I was concerned, if it was enough to frighten him, we were all in trouble. I scanned the field around us but saw absolutely nothing. My eyes landed on David, who must have seen the same thing Jack did because he let me go and ran away. No, I shouted. David, come back. Jack clamped a hand over my mouth, stifling my urgent cries. If there was something in the cornfield with us, David shouldn't have gone off alone. I considered biting Jack's hand just so I could call out to my friend, but just as I managed to get a small piece of flesh between my teeth, Jack began to swear again. Shit, he squeaked, tightening his grip on me. The absolute fear in his voice stopped me from my endeavor. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but his hand was still firmly clamped against my mouth. Dad, he shouted as he sprinted toward the road. What, did you find her? Dad shouted back. I was being jostled back and forth, the motion of it all making me sick to my stomach. I tried to reach the ground so I could run beside Jack instead of being carried, but he had me pressed against his chest, my feet dangling helplessly above the dirt. Dad, he shouted again. Dad, his voice broke, and I looked up. Fresh wave of nausea washed over me when I realized he was crying. My dad's voice became frantic as the two of them searched for one another. Finally, we broke free of the cornfield just as my dad took a step in. Don't go in there, Jack shouted, tears streaming down his face. My dad's face paled for the second time that morning. I don't think he'd ever seen his adult son cry. My mother was in a panic behind him. A panic attack, well, that too. Demanding what had happened, Jack shouted again that Dad needed to get out of the cornfield. My father eventually stepped away, humoring my brother. My parents flanked him as we all sprinted back toward the house. Jack practically dropped me onto the kitchen floor, but I didn't really notice. I was too busy watching him cry and shake and try to stutter out things that just weren't making sense. Eventually, my eldest brother, that I'd come to think of as more of a god than a man, collapsed onto the ground. He cried into himself, curled up in a ball like a scorned toddler, and that image is forever burned into my brain. The utter helplessness that radiated off of him. After what felt like hours of my brother sobbing on the ground, my mother rubbing his back and cooing soft words, he composed himself enough to speak. Look at her arm! Look at her arm! He shouted. His hand shot out to grab my own. He pulled me toward himself. My father stepped toward us, and I shrank away, unsure of what to expect from him, but the look of worry in his eyes quelled any fears I had of physical punishment. What happened? He asked, staring down at the handprint-shaped bruise that David had left on my arm. I hadn't noticed it until that moment. Once pointed out to me, I remember feeling more confused than frightened or angry. I eyed it curiously. I'd never bruised so easily before. What's more, I'd never gotten a bruise that large before. Jasmine? My dad asked, cupping my chin in his hand, forcing my head up. What happened? I gazed back at him dumbfounded. Why was he concerned with a bruise? Odd as it may have been, it wasn't that important. Jack and David had seen something terrible in the cornfield. Why weren't they storming outside, guns in tow? Why weren't they shooting whatever had my brother so frightened? Mountain lions were very prevalent in the area, and I assumed he'd seen one stalking us, or maybe a raccoon wobbling with the telltale signs of rabies. My dad had shot one of those once in the backyard, and it seemed logical that if it had brought him to that, it would do the same to Jack. Despite the utter confusion that plagued my young mind, I answered him. I just assumed we'd get to whatever it was that happened as soon as he knew I was okay. David tried to pull me. I intended to tell him the whole story about how David and Jack had treated me like a rag doll. No, Jasmine, tell me what really happened, Dad shouted again. And I jumped, pulling my arm back, not really understanding why I was in trouble. That is what happened, Jack said, his voice obtunded and distant. He sounded distraught, broken, and a little angry. What do you mean that is what happened? My father demanded, my mind spinning. Why were we talking about David? Why did anyone care about what happened between me and David? Why was this what we were talking about? I mean what I said, Jack shouted, burying his face in his hands. I jumped, letting out a small squeak as I put a few feet between myself and the cluster of family members. No one yelled at Dad, ever. That would be suicide. But Dad didn't get angry. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten to kick Jack out. Instead, his features crumpled, and he looked back at me. Jasmine, tell me what happened, he said, and there was something about his voice that made my stomach hurt again. I just told you, Jack shouted, standing up suddenly from his place on the kitchen floor. He stabbed a hand at the refrigerator to the picture of David and I holding hands. He looked just like her fucking drawings. My heart leapt. Jack swore again, but as my eyes went over to my dad, I realized he wasn't angry. He acted as though he hadn't even heard the word. His features were pale and his hands shook at his sides. Skinny kid, brown skin, black hair, jeans, red shirt. It was in that moment that something struck me. I'd never thought much about it before, but the way Jack shouted about David's clothes made me realize I'd never seen him outside of the red t-shirt and dirty jeans. But Jack's voice drew me out of my thoughts. But his voice broke and he buried his face in his hands again, tears streaming down his face. What? My mother asked. Jack, what? He looked up to them, his face white as a sheet. Tears stained his cheeks and ran into his beard. His voice trembled. He didn't have any eyes.
No.
Uh,
Creepy.
so then it's like, okay, wait a minute.
Yeah. What?
Like this is like, okay, because that was a couple different parts of it, and I'm seeing now that there are actually even more parts. So I'm
Oh,
like
wow.
not gonna finish the whole thing this
Yeah.
time. It'll probably be the one I like revisit for the next few holiday
Uh-huh.
episodes. But like,
What
so
is
did they
he?
did they ever see him?
Yeah,
And he's like trying to convince their kid to like do all this scary shit that she knows she's not supposed to do.
right. A little demon child.
Right.
And yeah, to them, was he her imaginary friend?
Maybe.
Yeah,
But
because,
then, like, the mom asked him questions at dinner, but she didn't respond to his answers.
right.
I went
Yeah,
back and read that little scene.
yeah. Interesting. And he said that he looked like her drawings.
Yeah,
So,
not like David.
yeah.
Yeah.
So probably it was her imaginary friend. But then he also, was he responsible for pushing the brother down the stairs?
I don't know. We may have to wait to find out.
Yeah, maybe that's in the
a,
next part.
a Christmas cliffhanger, bitches.
Yeah, what's our next holiday? Valentine's Day?
um,
Or no, Martin
yeah.
Luther King Day?
Yeah, we could make that.
Yeah, why not?
We can make that a celebratory kind of thing. I love it.
Spooky civil rights
Spooky
stories.
civil rights, baby.
Yeah.
We love it. Yeah, so that's the summer I met David.
That is creepy. Where are David's eyes?
First, where are his eyes? So it's like I feel like it just gets scarier and scarier, like based on the parts I have read. So buckle up,
Okay.
baby.
I can't wait. We'll look
Jeez.
forward to MLK Day.
MLK Day, and I'll give you guys a refresher too on the Orig next
Yeah.
time.
Okay. Or the next
Hmm.
holiday is New Year's Eve, New Year's Day.
Oh, that's true.
We could
Actually,
just do that for next week.
okay, I like that.
Why not?
That's a
We'll
good idea.
continue.
Why not? And then we'll get back on our astral projection bullshit.
Yes. That sounds good. It's been a
Still
little
so fascinated.
hiatus. Yeah, same.
Okay, Amy, Christmas is right around the corner. What are you asking for?
Yeah, can you believe Christmas is almost here? It's so
No.
my blender broke
Oh
recently
no.
and we haven't replaced it yet. And I love making smoothies. Dave loves making smoothies. So
Ugh.
we have
A smoothie loving couple. We
I
love to see
know.
it.
Yeah. So, but obviously getting smoothies every day can be expensive.
Yeah.
So, I put on my list the BlendJet 2, which is a portable
Ooh,
blender, which is even cooler because it's, you can take it with you. It's not bulky. It doesn't have to sit on your counter, all of
I
the
love
above.
that. Yeah, I know the BlendJet 2 is portable, so you can blend it at work. You can make a protein shake at the gym or even a margarita on the beach if you're feeling spicy.
Amazing.
Um, it's small enough to fit in a cup holder, but powerful enough to blast through tough ingredients, even ice and frozen fruit with ease. The BlendJet 2 is whisper quiet, so you can make your morning smoothie without waking up the entire house so Dave can catch his Z's.
That's really
It,
nice.
it lasts for 15 plus blends and recharges quickly via USB-C. And best of all, BlendJet 2 cleans itself. Just blend water with a drop of soap and you're good to go. I don't know if you've been on the site. There are also a ton of cute designs. I'm thinking that when my nephew is old enough, I might get him the one that looks like it's like branded for Toy Story, so it looks like Buzz Lightyear colors.
Oh, yeah, so cute. I saw they have
So
some
cute.
Disney ones. They've got Lisa
Yeah.
Frank for
Oh
our
my God.
demographic.
Throwback.
We
Let's
love
go.
it. Yeah. So, what are you waiting for? Go to blendjet.com and grab yours today. And be sure to use the promo code that we have, which is GGS12, to get 12% off your order and free 2-day shipping.
Yay.
Okay, well, shall
Your
I go
turn.
now? Okay, let's
Yes.
see how long my voice will hold out. Because I do have a few stories, but we'll see. Maybe it'll be a
Okay.
continuation in the next
Yeah.
episode. Um,
Yay.
okay, so first, though, I found that I think this is probably not a surprise that
Hmm.
during the Victorian era, there was a fascination with death, with ghosts, with all of
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
And Christmas time was not an exception. So they
Mm.
the tradition was actually to tell ghost stories on Christmas Eve. And they weren't ghost stories like what's the one with the ghost of Christmas past? Is that A Christmas
Christmas
Carol?
Carol.
Yeah,
Hmm.
they weren't all like that, which isn't that scary. It's they were like genuinely creepy stories. So I wanted to read
Yeah.
some of those, but they were so long. So I'm not going to. But they included like demon children, kind of like David, um, people like tapping on windows, just creepy stuff. So I have a link if anyone would actually want to read those, we could share it.
Yeah.
But um, also, kind of in line with that, the Victorian people would send out Christmas cards that were absolutely so strange.
Oh my
And
God.
I have a site that I put on our notes so that we can share some of them on Instagram. Um, but yeah, these Christmas cards are like so odd. There's like scary looking snowmen,
Oh
weird
God.
weird people that look like root vegetables and like frogs killing each other.
Yeah, what?
Yeah.
What is
Yeah.
that?
And then
Like
yeah,
fleeing a murder scene? Like
right.
what is that?
Isn't that weird? And then on the bottom, what does it say? Like, have a Merry Christmas
A
or
Merry
something.
Christmas to you. Like
Yeah.
what?
With this image of a murdered frog.
And like
But
another frog running away.
yeah, I know. So very odd. And then one of the recurring themes of those is dead birds, which I have an
Yeah.
example of that too. Um, and that has a little bit of history behind it that is Celtic in tradition, and
Hmm.
it's actually associated with the day after Christmas, which is known as Saint Stephen's Day, which I did not know.
Hmm.
And the tradition is equally creepy that in Ireland, the feast day, so the day after Christmas.
Okay.
Um, it's some name in Gaelic that I'm not even going to attempt,
Yeah.
but it translates to the day of the wren or wren's day. And
It's like someone saying Wednesday
yeah,
with like a weird accent.
yeah, but wren's day.
Wednesday.
Happy Wren's Day. Um, but yeah, so the tradition on Wren's Day was for groups of small boys who would hunt for a wren, then chase the bird until they either caught it or the bird died from exhaustion.
Oh God, that's so
I know,
cool.
terrible. So, yeah. And then they, after it was dead, they would tie it up to on a pole or to a holly bush. And so
Oh,
I don't
that's
know.
like kind of creepy.
Yeah. So it's like that's associated with Christmas, I guess, because it happened the day after Christmas. But I don't know why you would want that on a card that's supposed to be like well wishes for your loved ones
Yeah.
during the holiday season. But I just thought that was interesting that
Oh my
there's
gosh,
just a bunch of weirdos. But
that's so funny.
yeah, so that's the first part. And then I have some stories from Reddit. And I can't remember if these were both from No Sleep. I want to say that they were.
Yay.
So, yeah. I tried to sort of do a Christmassy theme, like this first one. They're both very strange.
Okay. I
The
mean,
first one
no
is about a
surprise.
tree,
Okay.
like a Christmas tree, but not a Christmas tree.
Creamatory.
And then the other one is it just takes place in the winter time. So
Yeah.
that's what I drew there.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
So the first one is I think this is username Circe's pork roast, which is Circe from Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's a reference that I'm not
I
getting,
don't know
but
what her pot roast is, but oh my
yeah.
God, there's a cat that there's
Oh,
a cat.
oh,
Oh, he's going back
hello.
behind the fence. Oh, that's so funny. I've never seen a cat in this yard. It must be the neighbors.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
Oh, a little
I
visitor.
saw something. I was like, "What the hell is
Oh.
that?"
It's David.
It's David, dude, coming to get me with no eyeballs.
Sorry, I had to pause for a cough.
You're good.
Um,
Pause for a cause, but pause for a cough.
exactly. Okay, so here we go. Circe's pork roast. This is called, I think the tree outside my window wants me dead.
Oh,
Spooky,
I
right?
hate that
Right, I
already.
know. I know. Okay, here we go. So, I don't like the tree outside my window. The tree outside my window doesn't like me either. We have lived in this house for 10 years. That's a long time to live next to a tree that hates me. When we first moved here, I was very young, still in kindergarten, and I knew right away that I did not like the tree. I didn't like the way it watched me through my windows at night. I would ask Mama to pull the curtains, and she would, but I knew the tree could see me anyway. Yeah.
Uh,
Yikes. It's weird to be hated by something that can't speak and has no face. How do I know it hates me? I can feel its hatred like steam rising off of the bark. When I am under it, it drops sticks on my head. Sometimes I worry that it will fall over one day and crash into my room and kill me. The tree will die too, but it will take me out with it. And I think the tree will see this as a worthy sacrifice. I would ask to have a different bedroom, but there isn't one for me to move into. Just the one for my mom and dad, and the one for me by the tree. Sometimes I dream of the tree. Usually the dreams don't make sense, but sometimes they do, and they're about the tree growing and growing. I am trapped inside the branches, and the tree grows around me. It swallows me into it as it gets bigger and bigger until it's the size of 2 or 3 or even 4 houses. And then the wood closes up around me, and I am completely inside the trunk. Then I die inside the tree, and I wake up, and I feel as though the tree is laughing. Spooky.
That is really creepy.
Yeah, and it continues. So
Good.
I think the tree is getting angrier. It can see me growing and getting older, and it doesn't want that. The anger is getting hotter, and sometimes it makes me sweat at night. One day I went outside and there was a swing dangling from the tree. It looked old, like it had always been there. I never go anywhere near it, and it never moves, even when it's really windy outside. That was 2 months ago.
Ew, it
Every
just like appeared there to like
yeah,
warn him.
yeah,
Wow.
right. And unmoving, that's also a weird detail.
Yeah.
Um, every day I get more and more afraid of the tree. The branches have gotten so close to my window that they scrape against the glass at night like they're trying to break in. I can't tell anyone that I'm afraid. I haven't spoken to anyone else about the tree in years. Because when I was little, I asked Mama about the tree outside. I asked if it would ever be cut down. I tried not to seem too eager about it, and Mama looked at me funny and said what everyone else has said to me since. There is no tree outside your window. There never has been.
No.
Isn't that
Mm,
weird? What is
no.
she seeing? And I've never thought about a demon taking the shape of a tree or whatever that
Oh,
would be, some entity.
that creeps me out like beyond explanation.
Really
I
interesting.
really don't like that. Because, like, think about, like, demons and, like, black-eyed kids. Like,
Mhm.
they take the form sometimes of something or someone that would be seemingly vulnerable.
Yeah,
Like, what's more vulnerable than, like, Mother Nature?
right.
Or, like,
Yeah,
protective in the same way. Like, Mother Nature, like, protects us too,
yeah,
So it's
that's
like
true.
I'm looking outside at trees and I'm
I
like,
know. They're everywhere.
"You hate me?"
Yeah, I know.
Ew, dude. Also, like, how creative a
I
story
know.
it
Really
is.
good
Oh,
story.
I really liked
Yeah,
that.
same.
Okay. Hit me with the next one.
Okay, this is the last one I have, and it's a little bit longer. And I already took some sections out because it was very long.
Okay.
So it's by Dark Knight Tales on Reddit again,
Mhm.
and it's called I'm a Winter Caretaker at a National Park in Alaska, and I've got
Oh
some
god.
stories to share.
Oh god. I'm
Yeah.
nervous.
Yeah, so, okay, I'm not sure how best to go about telling you about some of the things I've seen up here in the dark, frozen days of winter. So I'll just dive right in and tell you about the shades.
Oh god.
Mhm. So, at least that's what I call them when I'm talking to myself. I have no idea what they really are, but when the winter storms are blowing strong against my shuttered cabin windows and the visibility in the snow and dim light are next to nothing, you'll see them. It's almost like looking at someone moving behind a pane of frosted glass, all indistinct and shadowy. At first, I just thought my mind was playing tricks on me, finding patterns in the chaotic static of all that falling snow. But then I started hearing them as well.
Nope. That's
Mm,
okay.
yeah, I'll pass. Like murmurings, just loud enough to hear over the howl of the wind, but too quiet to recognize them as any sort of intelligent speech. It's enough to set you on edge, I can tell you that much. They tend to only show up during a heavy snowstorm, and the fiercer the storm, the closer they'll come to the cabin. It's gotten to the point where I'll make sure I've locked my doors and windows long before nightfall if I know there is a storm coming.
Mhm.
One time, during an especially nasty blizzard, I could actually hear them moving all around my cabin like
Oh my
some
god, oh
sort
my
of
god.
nightmare parade.
A nightmare parade.
Yeah, no. That night was bad. At one point, I actually saw and heard the doorknob on my front door turning, all slow and deliberate, accompanied by what sounded like soft scratching at the wooden surface. The worst of it, and I'll swear on a stack of Bibles that it's the truth, not just one Bible, was the faint whispering voice that kept calling my name just on the other side of the door. Yikes. That went on for an hour or more, and even now, if I close my eyes, I can still hear that cold, hollow voice. It's what I would imagine a person would sound like if their soul were ripped from their body. I mentioned it to Rick, who is another ranger. The next day, after this,
Ranger Rick.
yeah, exactly. That's a great name for a ranger. Um, so mention it to Rick after the storm had quieted when I could get a radio signal out. I expected him to laugh at me for letting myself get all spooked by the dark, but he didn't. He very calmly and firmly told me that it was better not to talk about them at all and to just make sure I kept myself locked up nice and tight when the heavy snowstorms came. I tried to prod him for more information, but he just refused to elaborate any further. The only thing he would add was that not everything sleeps when the winter comes on up here.
Ew. Ew.
Yeah, Rick has a flair for the ominous. He's like, not everything sleeps.
Ominous Rick.
Mhm. Yep. Okay, then there's another part. So, the next thing on the list is the car graveyard. I shit you not, if you explore far enough off the beaten trail out here, chances are pretty good you'll find one. A car or truck just inexplicably deposited in the middle of backwater Alaska, like that makes any sense at all. The first one I ever saw was an early 2000s BMW, looking like it was just off the showroom floor, except for the fact that half of it was embedded in an old spruce tree that had probably stood there since before cars even existed. It almost looked like
What?
the tree, yeah, bizarre. It almost looked like the tree had grown around the car, or maybe the car had been interposed into the tree. I don't know how it's possible. I just know that it was there. It
Maybe it's a
was,
demon tree.
I know. I was just going to say there's a
So
tree theme
similar.
going on.
Yeah.
Creepy. Um, okay. Uh, I've seen a few of them during my time here, sometimes trapped in the trees like that BMW, and sometimes just sitting in the middle of an open space of ground. Every one of them looked like they were fresh off the road, and none of them had any logical way they could have gotten out there, even without the whole stuck in the trees part.
Hmm.
The most unnerving thing about the cars, though, is the clothing. Yikes.
Oh God.
I've stopped looking and just tend to avoid going anywhere near one if I see it, but the first time I saw one, my curiosity led me to check it out. I tried to open the doors, but they were all locked. When I looked in through the windows, though, I saw the damnedest thing. In the front seats, it looked like someone had laid out clothes pants, shirts, socks, shoes, the whole deal, and strapped the seatbelts around them.
No.
It was like the people in the car had just vanished in mid drive, leaving their clothes behind just the way they'd been wearing them. Eerie is one word for it, but if I'm being honest, it scared the shit out of me. Yes, me too.
Same. Retweet.
Exactly. The other thing about the cars is that you won't find the same one twice. When I saw that first BMW, I came back out the next day with my camera to take a picture of it, but it wasn't there anymore.
What?
I thought I'd simply forgotten where it was or that I'd gotten turned around, but when I saw my boot prints in the snow from the day before, I knew I was in the right spot. I tried to report this to the Rangers as well, but Rick told me they wouldn't even send anyone out to investigate them anymore. By the time anyone got there, they'd be gone. Apparently, reports of this sort of thing have been coming in periodically over the last 20 or 30 years, and nobody knows anything about them. He did tell me that one of the rangers had found one once, a school bus from Texas.
No. Mm-mm.
Which,
Oh
how would that
God.
get there all the way from Texas?
Oh, are there
Um,
clothes? Like kids' clothes?
yeah.
Oh gosh.
In each of the rows of seats were piles of empty clothes, with the exception of the driver. Odd. The ranger that found it said that the driver was sort of there, but not really, almost like a blurry hologram frozen in time. He said that the driver, an elderly man, looked like he was frozen in some terrified scream, all wide eyed and gaping mouth. The ranger tried to get into the bus using the rear emergency door, but when he got the door open, a loud buzzing sound filled his ears, and a high frequency vibration ran through his body like an electric shock. He said the closer he got, the more intense the sound and sensation became. Before he could even take a step inside the bus, it grew so strong that he thought he was going to pass out. The best he could describe it was like when you have two strong opposing magnets that you're trying to push together. The more you push, the stronger the resistance becomes. He said it was almost like the universe was somehow keeping him out of that bus, like he didn't belong in it. Um,
Yeah. Sounds actively like he doesn't belong in it
yep.
to me also.
Yeah, same. And the last little bit, he stumbled away from it and spent the next day in bed, sicker than a dog. When he came back out a few days later with some other rangers, the bus was gone.
Whoa.
So that's that story.
Oh,
Spooky.
dude.
Yeah.
With that reminds me for some reason, remember that show Fringe?
Mm,
It was on Fox,
yeah,
I
I think
think.
I do, but I don't know if I watched it.
It was good. It was like fringe science, but it was almost like X-Files maybe, but like
Hmm.
I can't remember if X-Files had any like the world's gonna end if we don't fix this kind of thing, but
Yeah.
there was more of that kind of energy with it, but it was all like fringe science and these like crazy like things that were happening like this where like people would like a bus would like go back in time and people they
Hmm.
were like they're like what? And so this like fringe department of like the FBI or an
Oh,
equivalent would like go and like try
investigate.
to solve these cases with
Wow,
scientists.
that's cool.
um it was a good show, but that reminded me because there were I think a couple episodes that were either like on a subway or on a bus, and it was a similar kind of thing where like everyone on the bus died,
Oh,
but it was like they died and there was some like high frequency thing too,
oh,
like super weird,
yeah. Maybe this writer got the idea from that show.
inspired from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe,
Hmm.
but ooh,
Yeah. Very
creepy.
weird. Very creepy.
Very creepy. Oh, I
Yeah.
love it. Wait, I'm so excited that we're doing this again next
I
week.
know. There's so many of these
There's so many
good
good ones.
stories.
I'm gonna properly read through the rest of the parts of The Summer I Met David
Okay.
so that I can sorry.
She's bored.
No,
Just
she's
kidding.
not bored, she's just tired. She went to Soul Cycle.
Oh, good for
No,
you.
which was very fun. But exhausting.
Hmm.
I'm gonna try to fit it all into the next episode without taking like an hour, so I will do
Okay.
that.
Okay.
But
Sounds
um
good.
happy Hanukkah to anyone out there who's
Yeah.
on what would it be the day this is released would
When
be
did it
day
start?
5,
Sunday?
4? Yeah,
S-
or Monday I think was the first
Oh,
day. So
day
day
four?
5
Oh,
of
yeah.
Hanukkah.
Hmm.
Um and Merry Korima to anyone celebrating Korima,
Happy
and
Christmas.
just like generally happy holiday season
Hmm. Yes.
uh to the rest of y'all and all that fun stuff. We hope that your Christmas is haunted as fuck.
Don't forget to tell ghost stories on Christmas Eve. We
Yeah,
should
don't
bring
forget
back
and
that tradition.
to send your friends really fucking creepy Christmas cards that
Yeah.
are like, "I've come to see you," with like a goat over a little boy's shoulder. Like,
Right.
okay, demon, stay away.
Yeah.
And tune in next week for more scary stories. And I promise also, in addition to summarizing a little more the rest of the parts, that I will say David.
You'll be
Not David.
practicing
David. I'm gonna be practicing all
all
week.
week. Yeah.
Doesn't David usually have an E at the end? I guess
Um,
that's what's tripping me up, is reading it. It just looks like David, but then maybe I'm just racist.
Not in Spanish. There's no E, but
Okay.
it usually
Oh, okay.
has an accent, I think, on the
The
I.
I.
David. Yeah,
Okay.
I think.
David. Oh yeah, I can see it now in
Yeah.
my mind's
I
eye.
think maybe in
Um,
Italian it has an E on the end. And
Davide.
I'm ashamed that the fact that I know that is from Love Island because there was a contestant from Italy whose name was Davide.
Oh
And yeah, I
my
think he
god.
won actually. So congrats,
Wow. Well,
Davide.
spoiler alert.
Sorry.
Kidding. I don't care at all. I'm dead. That's hilarious that that's your knowledge source. Respect. Yeah, so I'll get my shit together for all you Spanish speakers out there. I'm sorry that I'm just an absolute disappointment. I will be better next time.
No, no.
With more creepy demon David.
David.
Um,
Can't wait.
in the meantime, you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Girls Gone Spooky. And you can share with us any spooky stories, any holiday traditions, spooky or not, any like stories about meeting a creepy boy named David as a child.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, otherwise, stay spooky, friends.
Yeah.
Happy holidays.
Stay spooky. Bye.